you've made some criticisms of globalization, but you wouldn't go so far as pit globalists against nationalists. So can you explain how one can criticize globalization and the excesses of globalization without succumbing to that us versus them dichotomy that some of these demagogic figures do?
Well, as a self-introduction, let me say that although I am not a popular person in the conservative world, and although probably most American conservatives who care about me or have heard of me would not regard me as one of their own, it is still true that I am most of my work is about saving most of the conservative project as I grew up in it and knew it. So I want to save global free trade.
Yeah.
I want to save the free movement of capital. I think that the project that was built at the end of the Second World War of integration of the economies and global cooperation, institutional, I think this is the greatest thing in government the human species has ever done. And that in every way, the world of 1980 was better than the world of 1950, and the world post-Cold War was better than the world pre-Cold War. And these are tremendous accomplishments, and I want to save them. And you have to save them by understanding. And so when you talk about where it's gone wrong or where people made mistakes, and the reason that understand this is in the spirit of conservative reform. It is reforming in order to conserve. It is changing in order to keep the good. So I think there are two big mistakes that we made about globalization. First, I think the very word globalization was a mistake. Yeah. Because what globalization did was it took all forms of international integration and treated them as if you had to accept them as a package. They were one thing. And they're not. Immigration is not trade. And movement of capital isn't trade. And they are a different thing, again, from the institutions of international cooperation. So the two things I think we need to revisit. First and foremost, migration. Between 1990 and 2015, quarter of a century, 44 million people left the global south for the global north. That's the biggest voluntary movement of human beings in history. And it is unsurprising that it has had radicalizing effects on all the receiving countries, also on the departing countries. It changes the departing countries too, because those 44 million people send money back home and they change the social order. Their remittances change who is rich and who is poor back in the villages at home. It is a very disorienting event, and it has many good elements to it that we want to preserve, but we need to understand how it can't keep growing forever without shock. And the second thing, so I think we need to revisit the migration bit. And the second thing we need to think about is a lot of people, including me, thought that the arrival of China into the global economy, we had, in the 50s, we welcomed Japan and Germany back after World War II. And then in the 70s, we welcomed Taiwan and South Korea, Singapore and Hong Kong, the Asian Tigers, and so on. And then in the 80s, countries like Mexico, and then in the 1990s, India rejoined the world economy. And China was a little bigger, but it would be the same thing. Yeah. And there comes a point where just the sheer size of a country changed, that China's arrival in the international marketplace was different from all of those other previous arrivals. And if only in this one way, is that when Taiwan rejoined the world economy, or when Mexico did, they were never going to be big enough they could say to the world economy, okay, you folks, there are going to be some new rules around here, or we're just going to ignore them. They had to sign up for the pre-existing rules. When China, now the world's second biggest economy, perhaps soon the biggest, says, we don't want to play by the rules. It's very hard to make them. And we need to think that the institutions of globalization that work so well to bring all these other countries in, we needed to understand how different China was more fully than we did.
Yeah. And have you, so I think a lot of people are looking at China's behavior in recent months and years and have sort of come to the conclusion that it was perhaps a little bit naive to think that they would play by the international rules. But are you worried about the trajectory that China is on? Are you worried about the liberal international order, considering some of China's recent behaviour?
Well, of course, but I'm also not ready to give up. You're going to be wrong a lot of the time. It's just the nature of it's just in the human mind. So you can either be paralyzed by that, or you can act. I think the people in the early 1990s who bet hopefully on Russia did the right thing, even though it turned out to be a bad bet, because you have to try. And I think the people who bet in the late 1990s and early 2000s that China could join the World Trade Organization and would develop in a positive way, I think that was the right bet to make, even though it turned out to be mistaken. They were not wrong because they were mistaken. They were hopeful. And what was the alternative? It was conflict. So we now have more information. But I don't think we should give up hope. I mean, I think we want to build a structure of incentives that continues to offer China the possibility that the rest of the world is happy to share the planet with you. And we are delighted to see you achieve a higher standard of living for your population. But there's some things that the rest of us on Earth expect. Please don't lie about pandemic diseases. Please don't please don't fill the air with carbon. Please don't use your technology to control not only your own people's behavior. That's terrible enough and we don't like it, but try to police us? No. But we need to begin, and this is something I really would want to say to an Australian audience. Donald Trump's vision of the world is the United States can bark orders at people and they will comply. And that was never a good idea, but it's ridiculously obsolete at a time when the Chinese economy is maybe 80% the size of the American economy. China is too big to be barked at. And if you're going to build incentives to induce better behavior and to constrain worse behavior, you have to work with partners. The United States needs, as seriously as in the 1940s and 50s, to build a new global coalition, not against China, because the hand of friendship should always be there, but to be ready for them, for both the good and the bad possibilities.